I watched the moving trucks pull away from my childhood home, knowing my family would return from Europe to find it completely empty. They had no idea what was coming. I sat alone in my luxury apartment on New Year's Eve, staring at my phone as it vibrated with one angry message after another from my family. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, fireworks exploded across the city skyline in brilliant cascades of gold and silver, but I felt nothing except a strange hollowness in my chest. While the rest of the world celebrated new beginnings, I found myself trapped in the suffocating weight of my past, replaying the moment 6 months ago that changed everything. It had been a Sunday dinner at my parents' house, the kind of obligatory family gathering I had attended every week for as long as I could remember. My mother, Patricia, sat at the head of the table, her perfectly manicured nails catching the light as she gestured enthusiastically about the upcoming European vacation she had planned for my younger sister Brittany. The trip included 2 weeks in Paris, a week in the Italian countryside, and several days in Barcelona, all first-class accommodations and Michelin-starred restaurants. As she described the itinerary in loving detail, I felt something twist in my stomach. I had been sitting there quietly, pushing food around my plate, when Patricia casually mentioned that they couldn't afford to take 2 people on such an extravagant trip. So, naturally, it would just be her and Brittany. She said it so matter-of-factly, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Brittany really needed this trip, she explained, because she had been working so hard lately and deserved a proper vacation. The way she emphasized the word really made it clear that whatever I might need was secondary, inconsequential. After years of silent contribution, years of swallowing my disappointment and playing the role of the understanding older sister, I finally found the courage to ask in a voice barely above a whisper, "What about me?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and I watched my father Robert's jaw tighten ever so slightly. He didn't even look up from his plate as he responded in that cold, dismissive tone I had come to know so well. "You can go on your own trip anytime you want, Savannah." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat there frozen, watching my family continue eating as if nothing significant had just happened, as if they hadn't just confirmed what I had suspected deep down for years. I didn't matter. My feelings, my needs, my presence at this table, it was all just window dressing for a family that had been using me as their personal ATM for the better part of a decade. The realization crystallized in that moment with devastating clarity. I stood up so abruptly my chair scraped loudly against the floor. My hands were shaking as I threw my napkin onto the table, and for the first time in my life, I saw something flicker across my mother's face that might have been surprise. "That's enough," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "I'm done." I drove home that night with tears streaming down my face, the city lights blurring into streaks of color as I gripped the steering wheel. I had to pull over twice because I couldn't see through my tears. When I finally made it back to my apartment, I walked through the rooms looking at everything I had purchased for my family over the years. The expensive coffee maker I had bought my mother for Christmas. The cashmere throw blanket I had sent to brighten up their living room. The designer handbag that Patricia had admired in a store window and I had surprised her with the following week. Every item was a reminder of my desperate attempts to earn their love, to prove my worth, to be seen as more than just a convenient source of funds. That night, I started going through my bank statements, something I had been avoiding for years because I knew what I would find. The numbers didn't lie, and they told a story that made me physically sick. I had given my family $96,000 for the mortgage on their house, a house I had never lived in because I had moved out before they bought it. I had sent $800 every month like clockwork since I was 20 years old, working multiple jobs to make sure I never missed a payment. When Brittany's car broke down during her sophomore year of college, I had bought her a brand new Honda Civic, $22,000 that I put on a credit card and spent the next 2 years paying off. The spreadsheet I created that night documented everything. Furniture purchases, $47,000. New appliances for their kitchen when they decided to remodel, $12,000. Patricia's dental work, $8,000. Brittany's rent for her first apartment after college, $16,000 spread across 10 months because she needed time to find the right job. Birthday gifts, Christmas presents, emergency expenses that were never really emergencies but I paid for anyway because saying no meant being labeled as selfish. The total came to over $200,000, and that wasn't even counting the smaller amounts I had given without keeping careful records. I spent the next several weeks in a fog, going to work and functioning on autopilot, while my mind processed the magnitude of what I had uncovered. I started paying attention to things I had trained myself to overlook. I noticed that Brittany posted photos on social media almost daily, from expensive restaurants and boutique shopping trips, always tagged with phrases like blessed and family first, while I was eating ramen noodles for dinner so I could afford to pay off my mother's credit card debt. I noticed that my birthday last year had been celebrated with a dinner where I was expected to pay for everyone's meals, and my father had joked that since it was my birthday, surely I was treating. I had laughed it off at the time, but now the memory burned. I remembered Patricia calling me at work one afternoon, her voice syrupy sweet as she explained that Brittany was having trouble making rent again and could I please help out just this once. It was never just once. It was a pattern that had repeated itself so many times I had lost count. I always said yes, driven by some deep-seated fear that if I didn't, I would lose whatever fragile connection we had. I was afraid they would stop calling altogether, stop including me in family events, stop pretending we were a normal family. So I paid and paid and paid, buying a place at a table where I was never truly welcome. The turning point came when I was scrolling through Brittany's Instagram late one night and saw photos from her recent weekend trip to Napa Valley. She was posing in front of a vineyard, holding a glass of wine that probably cost more than my grocery budget for the week. The caption read something about self-care and treating yourself, complete with a string of heart emojis. I clicked through to see that she had been tagged at 3 different wineries, stayed at a luxury resort, and eaten at restaurants that required reservations months in advance. This was the same sister who had called me crying 2 weeks earlier because she couldn't afford her car insurance payment. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was simply done. It was as if a switch had flipped in my brain and I could suddenly see everything clearly, stripped of the emotional manipulation and guilt that had clouded my judgment for so long. These people didn't love me. They loved what I could give them. They loved having a reliable source of money that never questioned, never demanded reciprocity, never expected to be prioritized. They loved having someone they could blame for being selfish whenever I showed even the slightest hesitation about opening my wallet. I made an appointment with a lawyer named Liam who specialized in family disputes and financial matters. Walking into his office felt like an admission of defeat somehow, but I forced myself to go through with it. I brought 3 accordion folders stuffed with bank statements, receipts, email confirmations, text message screenshots, and a detailed spreadsheet I had created breaking down every dollar I had given to my family over the past 10 years. Liam sat across from me, his expression growing more incredulous as he flipped through the documentation. When he finally looked up at me, he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Did you ever sign anything saying these were loans?" I shook my head. "Did they ever acknowledge in writing that they owed you this money?" Another shake of my head. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Then legally, anything you purchased with your own money still belongs to you. The car is in your name, correct?" I nodded. "The appliances, the furniture, you have receipts showing you were the purchaser?" I nodded again. He smiled, and it was the first time anyone had validated what I was feeling. "Then you have every right to take back what's yours." Over the next few weeks, I started planning my exit strategy with the same meticulous attention to detail I had once applied to managing my family's needs. I found a beautiful apartment in Denver, a city I had always dreamed of living in but never allowed myself to consider because I needed to stay close to my family. I had visited once during a work conference and fallen in love with the mountain views, the outdoor culture, the sense of possibility that seemed to permeate the air. I applied for a remote work transfer and was approved within days. My boss actually seemed pleased, mentioning that they had been wanting to expand their presence in the Denver market anyway. I began sorting through my belongings, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. I went through my apartment with a critical eye, identifying everything that had any connection to my family. The framed photos came down from the walls, the gifts they had given me over the years, always inexpensive and clearly chosen without much thought, went into a box for donation. I kept only what was truly mine, what I had chosen for myself, what reflected the person I wanted to become rather than the person I had been forced to be. The notification about the family's European trip came through on the group chat, complete with flight details and hotel information. Patricia had included a long message about how excited she was, how Brittany deserved this special time, and how they would bring back souvenirs for everyone. I stared at that message for a long time, feeling nothing but a calm sense of certainty about what I was about to do. I replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji, giving no indication of the storm that was coming. The morning they left for Europe arrived bright and clear. I drove to the airport to see them off, playing my role one last time. Patricia kissed my cheek in that perfunctory way she had, giving me instructions about watering the plants and checking their mail while they were gone. Brittany barely acknowledged me from the back seat, scrolling through her phone and offering a distracted wave. As I watched their car pull away toward the departures terminal, I felt a strange sense of finality wash over me. This was the last time I would play this part in their lives. I sat in my car for a few minutes after they left, breathing in the fresh morning air and feeling lighter than I had in years. Then I pulled out my phone and made the call I had been planning for weeks. The moving company I had hired specialized in what they delicately termed sensitive relocations, situations where items needed to be removed from a property quickly and quietly. They arrived at my parents' house that afternoon while the neighborhood was quiet, 2 large trucks with efficient crews who knew exactly what they were doing. I spent that evening walking through the house one final time, mentally cataloging everything I was about to take. The refrigerator I had bought 2 years ago when their old one died, a stainless steel Samsung that Patricia had picked out from the most expensive tier. The washer and dryer set I had purchased when they decided the old ones weren't efficient enough, top-of-the-line models that had cost me nearly $3,000. The living room furniture, every piece carefully selected by my mother and paid for by me, the 70-inch television mounted on the wall. Brittany's bedroom furniture, including the vanity set she had insisted she needed for her makeup tutorials. I photographed everything methodically, making sure I had documentation of serial numbers and purchase receipts. I walked through each room slowly, saying a silent goodbye not to the house itself but to the version of myself who had lived in constant hope that one day my family would appreciate me. That girl was gone now, replaced by someone who understood that love should never come with an invoice. The moving crew began work early the next morning. I handed the foreman a folder containing copies of every receipt, every proof of purchase, every document that established my legal ownership of the items we were removing. He nodded professionally, having clearly handled situations like this before. They worked with remarkable efficiency, wrapping furniture in blankets, loading appliances onto dollies, boxing up smaller items with care. I watched as the house was systematically stripped of everything I had provided, leaving behind only the bare minimum. The refrigerator rolled out first, leaving a dark rectangle on the kitchen floor where it had stood. Then the furniture, piece by piece, until the living room echoed with emptiness. The television came down from the wall, revealing a rectangular shadow and the mounting bracket I left behind. Brittany's vanity, where she had filmed countless makeup videos for her modest social media following, was carefully disassembled and loaded into the truck. Her bedroom looked cavernous without it. By late afternoon, the house looked like a stage set after the production had closed. I left behind only an old, faded couch that Patricia had always hated, the one piece of furniture that predated my financial involvement in their lives. The walls had lighter squares where pictures and decorations had hung. The rooms felt cold and impersonal, stripped of the comfortable facade that my money had created. Before I locked the door for the last time, I placed an envelope on the kitchen counter, right where they would see it when they came home. Inside was a letter I had written and rewritten dozens of times, trying to find the right words to explain what they would find, or rather, what they wouldn't find. In the end, I had settled on simplicity and honesty. The letter read, "Mom, Dad, Brittany, everything I took, I paid for. For 10 years, I have subsidized your lifestyle while being called selfish for wanting even a fraction of the consideration you show each other. I'm tired of being valuable only when you need something. Consider this a return on all the times my kindness was mistaken for obligation. The house you're coming home to is the house you built without me. I hope you find it comfortable. Savannah." I included copies of receipts for the major items, along with a summary spreadsheet showing the total amount I had contributed over the years. I wanted them to see it in black and white, to understand exactly how much they had taken from me while giving back nothing but criticism and dismissal. I slid the key through the mail slot, listening to it clatter onto the hardwood floor inside. The sound felt definitive, like closing a book I had been reading for far too long. The drive back to my apartment should have felt triumphant, but instead I just felt numb. I had spent so much energy planning this moment that I hadn't really thought about what would come after. I ordered takeout that night, something I never would have done in the past because I was always saving money for the next family emergency. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, and then I went to bed early. My phone started ringing around midnight, my mother's name flashing on the screen. I turned it to silent and rolled over, sleeping more soundly than I had in months. The calls and messages started in earnest the next morning. I woke to find 47 missed calls and over 100 text messages. I made myself coffee, settled onto my couch, and began reading through them with a strange sense of detachment. Patricia's messages were long, rambling paragraphs about betrayal and family bonds, and how could I do this to them? She invoked every guilt-inducing phrase she could think of, talking about the sacrifices she had made raising me, the opportunities she had given me, the love she had shown me. It was fascinating in a clinical way, watching her try every manipulation tactic in her arsenal. Robert's messages were shorter and colder. He accused me of theft, said I had no right to take things I had given as gifts, threatened legal action. Brittany's messages were the most interesting because they cycled through every emotion. She started with shock, moved through anger, tried bargaining, and eventually landed on a kind of desperate pleading that might have worked on the old version of me. She sent voice messages where I could hear her crying, talking about how I had ruined her life, how she had nothing now, how could her own sister be so cruel. I listened to one of Brittany's voice messages while I drank my coffee. She was sobbing about how she couldn't even do her makeup properly without her vanity, how she had important meetings coming up and needed to look professional. The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me. She had never had an important meeting in her life that wasn't subsidized by my bank account. Every job interview she had prepared for, she had done so in clothes I bought, with makeup I paid for, driving a car I purchased. Liam called me around noon with news that my family had filed a police report. "They're claiming you stole their property," he said, sounding almost amused. "I've already sent over all your documentation to the precinct. The officer I spoke with said their case is essentially non-existent without proof of ownership." I felt a weight lift off my chest. I had been prepared for this, but hearing confirmation that the law was on my side made everything feel more real. Liam continued, "I've also drafted a cease and desist letter. If they continue to harass you, we can pursue a restraining order." I asked him to send the letter. I had no interest in prolonging this any further. I wanted a clean break, a clear ending to this chapter of my life. The harassment continued for another few days, but it began to taper off after Liam's letter was delivered via certified mail. The legal language apparently made an impact that my own words never could. I was no longer just ungrateful daughter Savannah. I was now represented by counsel, and that changed the dynamic entirely. A week after they returned from Europe, Brittany called from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Her voice was small when she spoke, stripped of the entitled edge it usually carried. "Savannah, please. We came home to nothing. Mom hasn't stopped crying. Dad is talking about selling the house. You have to understand how this looks." I let her talk for a few minutes, listening to her paint a picture of their suffering. When she finally paused, I spoke calmly and clearly. "I left you everything that was yours, Brittany. I took only what I paid for." She tried to interrupt, but I kept going. "The house is still there. The utilities are still on. You have beds to sleep in and a roof over your head. What you don't have is the luxury that my money provided, and that's not the same as having nothing." "I can't work without my equipment," she said, and I could hear the whine creeping back into her voice. "How am I supposed to do my makeup tutorials without my setup?" "Build it yourself," I said. "The way I built everything I have. Get a job, save money, buy what you need. It's not complicated, Brittany. You just have to actually do it instead of waiting for someone else to do it for you." There was a long silence on the line. Then she tried a different approach. "Mom has been crying for days. Don't you care about that? Can't you just be reasonable?" "Reasonable was the last 10 years, I said, feeling my voice harden. "This is justice." "Justice?" Brittany's voice rose. "You're destroying our family over furniture and appliances. Do you know how petty that sounds?" "I'm not destroying anything," I said. "I'm simply no longer building your lives for you. If that causes everything to fall apart, that should tell you something about the foundation it was built on." Another silence, longer this time. When Brittany spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "Do you hate us?" The question surprised me. I thought about it for a moment before answering honestly. "No, I don't hate you. I just stopped funding your lifestyle, and you're mistaking that for cruelty because you've never had to stand on your own." I heard her breath catch. "I hope you figure it out, Brittany. I really do, but I'm done being your safety net." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking slightly, but I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. I called my building security and gave them names and photos of my family members, with instructions that they were not to be allowed past the lobby under any circumstances. The guard on duty, a kind older man named Marcus, nodded sympathetically. "Family trouble?" he asked. I nodded. "Say no more," he said. "We'll keep them out." 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, and for a moment my heart sank. But when I called Liam and read it to him, he actually laughed. It was a poorly written demand letter threatening to sue me for emotional distress and return of property. Liam drafted a response that was 3 sentences long and devastatingly effective. He reiterated that every item I had taken was legally mine, that I had extensive documentation proving as much, and that any further contact from their legal representation would be considered harassment and dealt with accordingly. After that, silence fell. Not the temporary quiet before another storm, but a true, profound silence. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. The absence of my family's constant demands felt strange at first, like phantom limb syndrome. I would find myself reaching for my phone to check if they needed anything, or mentally calculating how much I could spare from my next paycheck, before remembering that I didn't have to do that anymore. Moving to Denver was like being reborn. I drove across the country with everything I owned, packed into a moving truck, watching the landscape change from flat plains to rolling hills to the magnificent Rocky Mountains rising in the distance. When I pulled up to my new apartment building, I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes, just taking it all in. The mountains were visible from my living room window, snow-capped peaks that seemed to glow in the afternoon light. It was exactly what I had imagined during all those years of dreaming about a different life. The apartment itself was smaller than what I had before, but it was entirely mine. I decorated it slowly, carefully, choosing each item because I liked it, not because someone else expected me to have it. I bought a comfortable reading chair and positioned it by the window where I could watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. I hung artwork that spoke to me, pieces I found at local galleries and artists' markets. I filled the bookshelves with novels I had always meant to read but never had time for when I was busy working multiple jobs to fund my family's lifestyle. I started hiking on weekends, something I had always wanted to do but never made time for. There was something profoundly healing about being in nature, about pushing my body up steep trails and being rewarded with breathtaking views at the summit. I joined a hiking group and made friends with people who knew nothing about my past, who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could give them. We would grab coffee after our hikes, talking about books and movies and travel plans, normal conversations that didn't revolve around who needed what from whom. My career flourished in ways it never had before. Without the constant stress of managing my family's financial crises, I could focus on my work. I was promoted within 6 months of moving to Denver, taking on a role that came with significantly more responsibility and a substantial raise. The extra money went into savings and investments, and for the first time in my adult life, I was building wealth for myself instead of subsidizing someone else's comfort. I started dating again, something I had avoided for years because bringing someone into the chaos of my family situation felt impossible to explain. I met Daniel through the hiking group, an environmental consultant who shared my love of the outdoors. Our first date was a sunrise hike, followed by breakfast at a local diner, and I remember thinking how easy it felt to be with someone who didn't expect me to perform or prove my worth. When I eventually told him about my family, he listened without judgment and simply said, "You did what you had to do. That takes courage." One afternoon, about 8 months after I had moved, I ran into an old friend from my hometown at a coffee shop in downtown Denver. Jessica had gone to high school with Brittany, and we spent a few minutes catching up before the inevitable question came. "How's your family doing?" she asked, and I could see the genuine curiosity in her eyes. I considered deflecting, but decided on honesty. "We're not in contact anymore," I said simply. Jessica nodded slowly, then said something that surprised me. "Yeah, I heard things got rough for them after you moved. Brittany deleted all her social media. Your parents sold their house and moved into something smaller." I absorbed this information without the guilt I might have felt a year earlier. Jessica continued, oblivious to my internal processing. "Brittany was working at Target for a while, but I think she got a job as a receptionist somewhere now. She seems different. More, I don't know, grounded maybe?" I thanked her for the update and we parted ways, but I found myself thinking about what she had said for the rest of the day. The idea that my family's comfortable life had completely fallen apart after I removed my financial support was not surprising, but hearing it confirmed felt strange. Part of me, a very small part, felt a twinge of something that might have been guilt or concern, but mostly I felt vindicated. They had built their entire lifestyle on my bank account, and when that disappeared, they had nothing left to stand on. It was harsh, but it was also fair. They had never considered what their constant demands were costing me, never worried about my financial stability or my emotional well-being. Why should I carry the weight of their consequences now? I learned through the grapevine that Patricia and Robert had downsized to a small townhouse, trading their spacious suburban home for something they could actually afford on their own income. Brittany had moved into a studio apartment and was, for the first time in her life, supporting herself completely. There were no more luxury vacations, no more shopping sprees, no more assumption that someone would always be there to catch them when they overspent. They were living the life they should have been living all along, one that matched their actual means rather than their aspirations. The information should have brought me satisfaction, and in a way it did, but not in the vindictive way I might have expected. I wasn't happy they were struggling. I was simply at peace with the fact that their struggles were no longer my responsibility. I had spent a decade trying to earn love through financial sacrifice, and all it had gotten me was resentment and expectation. Stepping back and letting them face reality was the kindest thing I could have done, both for them and for myself. I started therapy around this time, working with a counselor who specialized in family dynamics and codependency. Through our sessions, I began to understand the patterns that had kept me trapped for so long. The way I had confused financial support with love, the fear of abandonment that made me say yes to every request, the deep-seated belief that I had to earn my place in my own family. Dr. Chen helped me see that healthy relationships don't require constant payment, that love shouldn't come with receipts and invoices, that I had always been enough just as I was. 1 year after I left, I received a letter. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter forwarded to my new address from my old one. The return address was unfamiliar, but the handwriting on the envelope was Brittany's. I held it for a long time before opening it, unsure if I was ready for whatever was inside. Finally, sitting on my balcony with the mountains stretched out before me, I carefully opened the envelope. The letter was 2 pages long, written on simple notebook paper. Brittany's handwriting was less polished than I remembered, more hurried and uncertain. She started by saying she didn't expect me to respond, that she was writing this more for herself than anything else. She talked about the past year, how difficult it had been, how she had been forced to grow up in ways she never expected. She admitted that she had taken me for granted, that she had treated my generosity as an entitlement rather than a gift. She wrote about working retail, about the humiliation of having her card declined at the grocery store, about realizing that she had no idea how to budget or save or live within her means. The letter wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was an acknowledgement. She said she understood now why I had left, why I had taken back what was mine. She said she didn't know if we could ever have a relationship again, but she wanted me to know that she was trying to become someone I might be proud of. The last paragraph stuck with me. She wrote, I used to think you were being dramatic when you said we only valued you for your money. I thought you were making it up, being oversensitive. But now that I'm standing on my own, I realize I never knew you at all. I knew the person who paid for things, but I never bothered to learn who you actually were. I'm sorry for that. I hope you're happy wherever you are. You deserve to be. I read the letter 3 times, looking for manipulation or hidden requests, but I couldn't find any. It seemed genuine, a real attempt at accountability from someone who had spent years avoiding it. I folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer, unsure what to do with it. I didn't respond, at least not right away. I needed time to think about what, if anything, I wanted to say back. Life continued in Denver with a rhythm I had never experienced before. I woke up each morning without dreading the day ahead, without wondering what crisis would require my intervention. I went to work, spent time with friends, pursued hobbies I had neglected for years. I took a pottery class and discovered I loved working with clay, the meditative quality of shaping something beautiful from raw material. I joined a book club and attended their monthly meetings, engaging in passionate discussions about literature with people who actually cared about my opinions. Daniel and I grew closer, our relationship deepening into something real and solid. He never asked me for money, never expected me to solve his problems, never made me feel like my value was tied to what I could provide. When I had a bad day, he listened. When I accomplished something at work, he celebrated with me. It was such a foreign experience that it took me months to trust it, to believe that someone could want to be with me simply for who I was. On the anniversary of the day I had left my family, I did something I had been thinking about for months. I sat down and wrote a response to Brittany's letter. I kept it short, just 1 page. I told her I appreciated her honesty and that I was glad she was learning to stand on her own. I said I wasn't ready for a relationship yet, that I needed more time to heal from the years of being used and dismissed. But I left the door open, just a crack. I said that maybe someday, if she continued to grow and if I continued to heal, we might find a way to be sisters again, but it would have to be on equal footing, with mutual respect and clear boundaries. I mailed the letter without overthinking it, and then I let it go. Whether Brittany responded or not, whether we ever reconciled or not, I had said what I needed to say. I was no longer willing to sacrifice my peace for the possibility of family acceptance. If they wanted me in their lives, they would have to accept the person I had become, the person who knew her worth and wouldn't settle for less than she deserved. 2 years after moving to Denver, I was sitting on my balcony watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant shades of orange and purple. I had just gotten off the phone with Daniel, who was planning a surprise weekend trip for my birthday. My coffee was still warm in my hands, and I felt utterly content. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who worked herself to exhaustion, trying to buy love from people who were never going to give it freely. I felt compassion for her, but I didn't miss her. The greatest revenge I had learned wasn't watching my family struggle. It was building a life so fulfilling that I rarely thought about them at all. It was learning to invest in myself with the same generosity I had once shown them. It was surrounding myself with people who valued me for reasons that had nothing to do with my bank account. It was waking up each morning and knowing that everything I had earned for myself, and no one could take it away from me. I never received another letter from Brittany, and I was okay with that. Sometimes the best ending isn't reconciliation or closure. Sometimes it's simply moving forward into a life you choose for yourself, leaving behind the people who couldn't see your value. I had spent years trying to make my family love me, trying to prove I was worthy of their consideration. In the end, I had learned that I didn't need their validation. I had my own. Freedom doesn't always come with applause or congratulations. Sometimes it's quiet and simple, as mundane as paying your own bills, and knowing that no one has the right to demand your joy, your money, or your peace of mind. Sometimes it looks like an empty house and broken relationships. Sometimes it looks like starting over in a new city where no one knows your history. But always, it's worth the price you pay to claim it. I raised my coffee cup to the mountains, to the setting sun, to the life I had built from the ashes of the one I left behind. I had learned to say no without guilt, to prioritize my own needs without shame, to recognize love that came without conditions. These were expensive lessons, paid for in lost relationships and painful realizations, but I wouldn't trade them for anything. I was finally, completely, utterly free. And that freedom was sweeter than any revenge I could have imagined.